Hello again to all our fellow geeks out in the podcasting world. If you haven't guessed by now, this show is a little bit different. We don't have Matt with us for our June 4th episode, unfortunately. We're doing it as three different video segments, but it's all going to come together in one big podcast. But if you're looking to listen to this on the video version, you're going to see separate videos, up to three videos. The first one we just spoke about, which was all about artificial intelligence. Now we're going to talk about the idea of security. Security in the movies, AI, security, breaking in, hacking, what is real and what is not. And I'm going to start by giving you a big secret about the world of computers and hacking, and that is all the data, all of the items in the world stored on all of these disks all over the world, everything in the information superhighway, it's just zeros and ones that represent real things, but in themselves are not real things. And I think we forget about this. If we want to talk a little bit about movies, we're going to talk about this really neat idea called the half cent rounding problem, and it's used in the movie Superman 3, and it's also used in the movie Office Space. And the idea is very simple. Since all these computers are simply storing data in the amount of zeros and ones, let's take something as simple as your bank account. You use your banking every day, you use your credit card every day, you use your debit card every day, you don't think about it. But when you do the math on various functions like adding tax, there's always additional numbers that get added after the cents. So you buy something and it costs you $1.99, they add sales tax. What it actually will come out to mathematically is a number that it might be, let's say, $2.10, but it's really $2.109876234. And what we do is we round it up or we round it down based on whatever the rules of roundings that is used for the finance industry. But that means that additional half cents of things just gets rounded off. And they take advantage of this in the Superman 3 movie and in the Office Space movie because they say, well, what if we took all of these rounded numbers and we kind of snuck them into another account that nobody knew about? Now, in the real world, this is known as the salami effect because you're kind of cutting it into slices, and these slices you're kind of sneaking into another account. And in both of these, surprising to the people that did it, whether they be the gentleman Richard Pryor character or whether it be to the characters for the Inotech, they suddenly realize they have all this money in this account because these half cents keep coming up and coming up and coming up. And, where's all this money coming from? We're essentially inventing money in the digital world that doesn't actually exist in the actual world, but it will actually go into an account and let us take money. That's an interesting way that is fictionalized that does have some truth to it. You could technically do this. One of the main problems with it is it's not easy to create accounts which are untraceable. Now, in the world of cryptocurrency, we can do this with things like Bitcoin or Ethereum, these different types of cryptocurrency where you don't really know who exactly owns it. So that's one way, and it's done a lot in the real world in terms of how we might trick somebody into installing some software on their machine and force them to send us some cryptocurrency so that we can unlock it and give them access, or we threaten to sell their data if they don't send us some Bitcoin, and that's untraceable. But with many bank accounts and rules around bank accounts have to be validated to actually belong to an actual physical person. So if you were to try to sneak money into an account, unless you went to the trouble of somehow setting up an entire fake identity for somebody, it's hard to not have the bank simply say, well, that's the person who all these half cents are going into, so we know who the person is to blame and arrest. I suppose you could try to hack into somebody else's bank account and then have the funds go to their bank account and then sneak them out of your bank account into your own bank account. But again, that's going to be easily traceable. So it's a little bit more complex to do in the real world, but it is a real thing that these half cents exist. They can be sliced off and they can be put into a certain spot rather than just being dropped into nothingness, into the abyss. Hacking in movies is really interesting because it always seems so simple when we watch the movie and we watch how the hacker hacks into things. And some of the early movies, again, I brought up in our last segment, we talked about war games. In war games, the main character basically does a thing, again, this actually was a real thing back in the 80s with dial-up modems. And the way it would work is you would set up your software to just randomly dial. I shouldn't say randomly. It would start with a 7-digit number, and it would start with the first, the area, and then the last 4 digits, so 0001, and it would try to dial it and see if it could make a computer connection to it. And if it didn't, if it failed, fine, it would hang up and it would go 0002. And it would continue going through these until it actually found a machine that could pick up. So what happened was these companies out there would be connected, not to the internet, but they would have modems that would allow their companies to connect to them from remote locations, and they would have phone numbers that people could dial into. They would never publish the number, so they would think, oh, we're safe. Nobody's going to hack into us because nobody knows what phone number to dial, right? Well, the bad guys, and they're not always bad guys, they're just people experimenting. They're like, well, what if I just try every number? The computer can dial every number. I don't even have to be at home. I can just have it run this program to dial every number while I'm away. And then I come back and it tells me, well, these were the machines that I could successfully contact over the phone lines. And then you could go in and say, well, what happens when I dial that? What do I get as a login prompt? That's exactly what happens in the War Games movie. He's just doing this rotating dialing of systems. He finds a system, he gets a login prompt, and then he starts thinking, well, what could I possibly use to log in to this system? By the way, I love the movie War Games so much that I actually created a little simulator that you can connect to, and you can try pretending to hack into the machine was called the Whopper. You could try WOPR, and you could try accessing it yourself. And I'll put a link in the notes to this if you ever want to give it a try. It is a little bit technical, some of the things you have to do. I give the commands, but if you're into that sort of thing, you can get your own copy of my code. You could try hacking into this fake Whopper the same way. You could follow along in the movie, entering the same commands that the main character does, played by Matthew Broderick as a very young kid, by the way, and see the same thing. Another movie that, if you're into hacking, that you really need to watch because it's very important in the way that it describes the hacking scene in the late 80s and the early 90s. And the funny thing is, it's not all that inaccurate. Again, what happens is they show this idea of that you can just turn on any computer at any time. That doesn't even seem to be connected to any kind of network, and then magically you can access it. And that's not really the truth. But there did exist machines in those times that were connected to modems, that were on 24/7, and that you could access. And some of these events really did happen. In fact, at the start of the Hackers movie, again, this came out in 1995, they show a guy interfering with a television station, changing the shows that were supposed to be programmed by logging into the television station, changing its programming, and then the robot would remove these video cassettes back from those days into the new things, and he could change the programming to whatever he wanted. This is actually historic fact. There was an actual event that happened, I think it was about 10 years before that movie, where somebody did actually hack into a television station. They did change some stuff around. There was a lot of controversy around it. In the prior segment, we talked about artificial intelligence and the fear of artificial intelligence taking over the world. Well, this preys on the same type of fear, except instead of it being artificial intelligence, it's preying on the fear of hackers taking over our society. And that's what this was showing. Well, oh my God, they could change the programming for a television station. If they can do that, what else could they do? Can they get into our financial systems, and can they get into our secret weapon systems like they do in war games? And that's what it's preying on. It's preying on this fear. So again, Hackers, great movie to watch if you want to get into hacking. Another one is War Games, which again came out in 1993. There are all kinds of other interesting movies that may not be directly involved hacking. If you watch movies about the FBI or people hacking into the FBI, there'll just be this little scene in the background where apparently you just type a couple of magical commands like grant me all access, and then suddenly they get all access to the system. Not exactly how it works, definitely more complicated than that, but not as complicated as you might think. So let's talk about a little bit about what is real. So I already mentioned that, yeah, somebody did actually take over a television station back in the 80s. And again, I'll put a link in the show notes about that article that you can check out. Another thing that happened was the Free Kevin movement. And they showed this a little bit in the Hackers movie, although they title it a little bit differently. But it actually also is something that really happened. And Kevin Mitnick right now is a very, very, very rich security person in the IT world. But when he was a kid, people were so scared about what hackers could do. He was kind of the poster child for how the government was going to crack down on these people trying to hack into machines. And back in this time, people have found ways to, for example, cheat the phone company out of thousands of dollars of long distance charges by creating these things called blue boxes that would basically bypass the long distance system to make you make long distance phone calls without having to actually pay for it. And there was a lot of stuff going on, and poor Kevin Mitnick just kind of also was just sort of playing around with these ideas, but they made him the person that we're going to make him a shining example of the things that we're going to do. And they brought him to court. They charged him with all kinds of things, theft of devices, fraud, and stealing of money, all these things. And they were trying to build this case to try to show we are not going to let hackers do these types of things. And the response back from the community was enormous. People were selling bumper stickers and people were selling t-shirts, free Kevin, this is wrong, you know. And the thing is, you know, people are like, well, why are there people out there that try to hack into other people's machines? Like, what is going on in their mind that they think this is okay? You don't walk into somebody else's house and steal their stuff. Why do you try to get into their personal devices and look at them? And if you think with the mind of a hacker, not with the mind of, but if you think with the mind of a hacker, it's a little bit like thinking with the mind of a mountain climber or an adventurist or a thrill seeker, right? Why do you do it? Because it's there, because it's a challenge. 99.9% of the hackers that are out there trying to do stuff are not trying to do it because they want to steal something, because they want to get rich off it. Now, there are the small but loud group of people that we could call black hats, and they are out there to steal your data, and that is a real threat. They're out there to try to get money from you, to extort you, to trick you into doing things that you shouldn't do, to try to get stuff from you. And in the early days, you know, it was the emails coming around from the Nigerian princess saying, you know, oh, I have millions of dollars and I would just like to give them out to you, that would scam people. And the scams have gotten more and more and more complicated to the point that now it's hard to tell if the email that you're getting telling you that your banking password has been lost or stolen, please click this link to fix, is that legit? Or is that, you know, some sort of what we now call phishing technique to try to trick you to go to this fake site so they can steal your information? So that threat is real, but for the majority of people, they're just trying to understand. They're just trying to have a playground. They're just trying to see, can I do this? Not because they're trying to cause harm, just because of the thrill, just because of the credit they can get from trying to do it. It actually happened to me years ago, that I was given access. I wasn't trying to find different systems, but I was given access to what was called bulletin board systems, which is sort of a precursor to the internet that we have today. You would dial into them, and the school the school I was part of let me on to their system. And I discovered something by accident. So in those days, we didn't have Windows. The system was called DOS. And if you were connected to a machine and you hit the command Alt D, it would drop you to a DOS prompt, and then you could play with the stuff on your computer or whatever you want to do, and then go back into where you were. Well, I was into this bulletin board system and I accidentally hit Control D, not Alt D, and it dropped me to a DOS prompt and I didn't think anything about it until I started looking around. I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't my computer. What am I looking at here? And it was the files on the computer of the bulletin board system. So simply by typing or hitting that command, I sort of accidentally hacked into this system, and I left them a file that they would see the next time they reboot it saying who I was. And I think there might be a flaw in their software. It probably shouldn't have let me do this. And they contacted me quite soon after that, had a little discussion, and then, you know, sort of teach you about the ethics of computers, and then they fix their problem. But it was very easy. It was very easy back in those days for things to happen, for people to gain access to things that they probably shouldn't have had access to. And what happened to a lot of these people who were back in the 80s and the 90s getting in trouble for hacking ended up founding IT security companies today, leaders of the big IT security companies who were once hackers back in the past. So again, in the movie Hackers 1995, its theme is along that same idea, and it's interesting that it is, as a fictional show that's fictionalized, is very well following sort of some of the history of hacking that isn't really talked about. So there's definitely some truth in the security hacking world to how it's shown in some movies. Just keep in mind that the fear they're trying to propagate in these movies is the idea that the hackers are out there to take over the world. There are many different types of hackers. We have white hat hackers who are out there to try to find vulnerabilities to help people close those vulnerabilities so that other people can't get in. So they're kind of the good guys. We have the black hat hackers, like I said, smaller percentage but louder. We have groups like Anonymous now that try to go out there and basically say what we think is going right in the world, what we think is going wrong. There's sort of some people might classify them as cyber terrorism, but there's sort of a group trying to bring awareness to things that they think are injustices, and to use their hacking skills to create situations to change the direction, to change the course of that. So you might think that that's a good thing. You might think that that's a bad thing. And really, I'm not going to get into the ethics of all of that, but these groups do exist. There are groups that exist that are trying to steal your information. There are groups that exist that are trying to spread misinformation to throw you off and confuse us. This is all real things. These are all things that we need to deal with as a society. And at the same time, this is not the majority of what people do as IT. If you speak to your general programmer or IT analyst or the guy down the street that you think is a geek and is into computers, they don't have all these magical hacking skills. I'm going to mention one site called tryhackme.com, and this site teaches you a lot about the world of hacking, about the realness of how it all works. It's very modern, it's very up to date. It's not going to show you, how to hack into a computer that existed 20 or 30 years ago. These are things that exist today. These are tools that exist today that anybody can use to learn a little bit about how that hacking works. They actually give you their own little network of machines, sort of a sandbox of machines that you can play around with and trying to hack into. And it's completely legal. It's completely legit. It's just to teach you about how hacking works, to educate you a bit about how some vulnerabilities exist. There's another great company out there called Hack5. They produce some very interesting technology, which, again, as a tool, could be used to do a lot of bad things, but it also can be used to educate you on some of the weaknesses you might have in your own home network, or the weakness that a company might have in their own home network or their Wi-Fi network, and ways to improve that to keep you safe from the defenses of these black hat hackers. So again, truth versus reality, a little bit different, but closer than the prior segment where we talked a little bit between artificial intelligence and reality. So that's hacking and security in the movies. What is real and what is not?